The hum of the Galactic Council chamber stilled to an eerie quiet as the doors slid open, the alien delegates falling into uneasy silence. Jules Wren stepped in, his boots clicking softly against the polished floor. His eyes scanned the grand hall, an intricate dome of glass and shimmering metal, filled with the murmurs of dozens of alien species. He wore his usual disinterested smirk, his casual black suit a sharp contrast to the formality around him. Jules wasn't here for politics. He was a former soldier-turned-diplomat, more at home in a war zone than in a room of towering beings who looked like they'd been sculpted out of different elements of the universe. He was here because someone had requested human expertise. The large screen at the center of the room flickered, showing the chaotic scene from the planet's surface. On the broadcast, soldiers scrambled desperately, their weapons useless against a massive, clawed creature that seemed more beast than being. The Vorserek, the most dangerous predator in the galaxy, had been let loose during an exhibition of peaceful cooperation. The sight of it, the size of a small building, prowling through the city with its blood-red eyes and row upon row of serrated teeth, was nothing short of a nightmare made flesh. The scene shifted to a terrified mother clutching her child, running through the streets, before the transmission cut off, replaced by the panicked voice of an alien general. "This beast is impervious to our weapons," the general's voice crackled, barely audible over the screams. "Our best efforts are failing. We need assistance. The Vorserek cannot be stopped." The screen went black, and the room buzzed with tension. Alien heads turned, whispers rising like waves. Fear wasn't just present in the humans. Even the most powerful species in the galaxy, each more than capable of taking down armies, were powerless before the creature. That's when Jules spoke, his voice calm and almost too casual for the situation. "Okay, who's in charge of this mess?" The room fell silent again, as if everyone had forgotten about the humans in their midst. The leader of the summit, a towering creature with 4 arms and an insectoid face, shifted uncomfortably. "You, human, you believe you can do something?" Jules raised an eyebrow. "If you're asking whether I can handle a giant predator, the answer is yes. If you're asking if I'm in the mood for fighting one, the answer is no. But you did ask for help. So here I am." Before anyone could respond, the alien general's voice broke in again, more frantic this time. Your species, are all welcome to try, but our weapons are useless. What makes you think?" Jules gave a lazy shrug, unconcerned. "Trust me, one of us can handle it. No need for weapons." He turned and walked toward the doors, still unfazed, his voice drifting back behind him. "You've got a mess to clean up. I'll get the coffee." The delegation stood there, paralyzed by disbelief, as Jules' footsteps echoed away down the hall. But despite the confusion, one thing was clear. The humans were going to be their only hope. The wide doors to the council hall hissed closed behind Jules Wren as he stepped into the bustling corridors, his boots echoing off the sleek, silver walls. His fingers drummed on the side of his coffee mug as he walked, the aroma of strong caffeine cutting through the air. It was as if the world around him was in chaos. But to him, it felt like just another Tuesday. The corridor led him to an open chamber at the heart of the summit, a massive viewing platform overlooking the chaotic scene unfolding below. The broadcast was still live, showing the Vorserek rampaging through a crowded city. Its enormous claws dug into buildings like they were made of cardboard, and its massive tail whipped through the air, demolishing anything in its path. A chorus of alien voices buzzed around Jules, a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. The other delegates, standing along the balcony, were speaking in hurried tones, their many eyes darting between the screen and one another. No one knew how to stop it. The Vorserek was a killing machine, designed by nature to be the apex predator. It had no weakness, no apparent flaw. Jules took a sip from his mug, eyes narrowing at the image on the screen. The most dangerous predator in the galaxy, they had called it. His lips curled into a half-smile. If only they knew what it was like to deal with a predator back home on Earth. The human diplomats behind him shifted uneasily. "Commander Wren, what are you going to do?" one of them asked, his voice tight with nerves. "We have to figure out some kind of plan." Jules didn't look back. His eyes remained locked on the massive creature, now tearing through a government building. He scratched his chin, then set the mug down on a nearby console with a decisive thud. "Well, you know what they say. When in doubt, improvise." His voice was almost casual, too casual for a situation this serious. The room froze for a moment, as if the very idea of a human taking control of the situation was too absurd to believe. One of the alien generals, his figure a shifting mass of holographic tendrils, finally spoke. "What do you mean, improvise?" Jules grinned. "I'm going to go down there. Let's see if a slap to the face works as well for this guy as it does for some of the rowdy humans I know." Another wave of disbelief rippled through the room. The humans had never acted this brazen, this unconcerned. As Jules made his way toward the exit, the alien general shouted, "You can't be serious. That creature will tear you apart." Jules didn't even flinch. He just looked over his shoulder with that same cocky smile. "No offense, but I've been in worse spots than this." He winked, adding, "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? It's just a giant lizard, right?" The doors to the balcony slid open, and the hot, charged air of the outside environment hit him. He stepped onto the platform that led down to the ground level, the city below a war zone in progress. Without a second thought, Jules walked toward the rampaging Vorsarak, his steps deliberate and calm. Around him, the alien forces scrambled to control the chaos, but no one dared to follow him. Jules Wren didn't need weapons. He didn't need strategies. He just needed a slap, and he was about to deliver it. The ground beneath Jules Wren trembled with each thunderous step of the Vorsarak. The beast was a nightmare made flesh. Its long, blood-red eyes glowed with primal hunger, and its massive, clawed paws shredded through the streets as if they were made of paper. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning debris, the once pristine city now a war zone. But Jules didn't even flinch. He walked toward the creature as if it were a stray dog barking for attention. His boots crunched over the cracked pavement, the faint hum of his breath cutting through the chaos. Around him, alien soldiers were running, shouting orders into communication devices, but none of them dared to approach. The Vorsarek's growls echoed like distant thunder, shaking the very foundations of the city. Jules stopped a mere 20 feet from the beast. The creature's eyes locked onto him, its body tensing, muscles rippling under its sleek, leathery hide. Its jaws parted with a growl that rattled the bones of everyone within earshot. The alien soldiers froze, watching in disbelief. No one had ever dared approach the Vorsarak so casually. Not even the most experienced hunters had survived close contact. Jules raised an eyebrow. This was it, the moment of truth. There was no turning back now. He glanced briefly to his side, where the terrified human diplomats were watching from a safe distance. Their faces were pale with fear. One of them, a woman with short, dark hair, covered her mouth, as if bracing for an explosion. Jules didn't even look at them as he raised his hand, his fingers curling into a fist. One slap. That's all it would take. The Vorsarak roared, an earth-shattering sound that sent birds fleeing from the trees. It lunged toward Jules, claws extended, ready to tear him into ribbons. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. The ground beneath him seemed to buckle with the force of the predator's movement. The beast's massive jaws snapped shut just inches from his face. And then, in one smooth, almost casual motion, Jules slapped the Vorsarak across the face. The sound of the impact rang out like a thunderclap. For a long, breathless second, nothing happened. The Vorsarak paused mid-lunge, its glowing eyes wide with shock, its massive body frozen in place. Its jaw hung open in confusion, as if it had never felt such an affront before. Then, to everyone's amazement, The Vorsarak let out a strange, whimpering noise, something that could almost be mistaken for a yelp. It staggered backward, its massive frame swaying like a child caught off guard. Jules took a step back, casually brushing his hands on his pants. His grin never faltered. I guess I've got some experience with getting beasts to behave. The alien soldiers stood, frozen, mouths agape. It was as if they had just witnessed a miracle. The creature, feared and revered across the galaxy as the ultimate predator, had been tamed with one slap. The Vorsarak blinked, its previous fury now replaced by a bewildered confusion. It lowered its head, almost in defeat, as if realizing it had been bested by something it had never encountered before, a human's sheer audacity. A silence fell over the city as Jules raised his hand again, this time offering the creature a casual wave. The world watched, stunned, as the Vorsarak, the most dangerous predator in the galaxy, backed away from the human diplomat. The collective breath of the universe seemed to hold, suspended in disbelief. Jules Ren's voice cut through the silence, a confident chuckle escaping his lips. Well, that's one way to solve a problem, huh? The room was buzzing. The massive chamber, once filled with pride and assurance, now hummed with the chaotic energy of disbelief and awe. Jules Ren sat casually at the center of the council hall, his legs kicked up on the table in front of him, sipping from a fresh mug of coffee. Around him, the alien delegates exchanged frantic whispers, their eyes flicking toward him every few seconds, as if still trying to process the unbelievable event they had just witnessed. In one corner of the room, a high-ranking diplomat from the Erden species, a race of insectoid beings whose antennae twitched in agitation, spoke loudly to his colleagues. "This is unacceptable. How could this human tame the Vorsarak so easily? It should have killed him in an instant." A booming voice from the other side of the room interrupted him. The Fave, a species resembling towering translucent jellyfish, floated down from their hovering platform. The creature, it didn't just stop. It was controlled somehow. This human, this earthling, has some power we do not understand. The murmurs in the room grew louder, a wave of panic cresting over the assembled diplomats. For centuries, the Vorsarak had been the ultimate symbol of predatory power, a force that even the greatest civilizations dared not challenge. The idea that a single human could render it helpless with nothing more than a slap was not just shocking, it was deeply unsettling. At the far end of the room, the Togreth, a bipedal species with jagged scales that rippled like liquid metal, stepped forward. His voice was low and controlled, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he addressed the council. It cannot be ignored. If humans possess this level of dominance over creatures like the Vorsarak, they must be considered a potential threat. The question is not how to deal with the Vorsarak anymore. It is how do we deal with humanity? Jules raised an eyebrow, looking up from his coffee. His tone was light, almost amused. "Threat? Please, I just wanted to see what the big guy could do." He chuckled, leaning back in his chair as if the fate of the galaxy were no more concerning than a casual dinner conversation. "You're all overthinking this. It's simple. You give them a little smack, remind them who's boss, and voila, peace." The room fell into stunned silence. A few delegates exchanged glances, their expressions conflicted between bewilderment and grudging admiration. A human had just defeated their deadliest predator without even breaking a sweat, and yet, here he was, lounging like a man on vacation. The Gorlaks, a race of creatures that looked like living boulders, growled from the side, clearly uncomfortable. "Do you not realize the power you hold now? You have no idea the panic your actions have caused." The Vorsarak was more than just a creature. It was a symbol, an untouchable force. And now, Jules glanced at the Gorlaks with a look of mild amusement, before giving a shrug. "Hey, it's not my fault you all let your monster run loose. I just gave it a little adjustment." He leaned forward slightly, his grin widening. "Trust me, if you really think I'm a threat, you'd be in a lot more trouble by now. Don't worry so much. The tension in the room remained thick, but now some of the delegates seemed to be reconsidering their earlier fear. The Netheri, a race of telepathic beings, exchanged silent thoughts between each other. It was clear that they too had been rattled by the sight of Jules's calm, effortless approach. For all their knowledge, their strength, their technology, they had never witnessed anything like this. The Erden diplomat stood up sharply, his voice rising with frustration. We cannot allow a species like this to gain any more ground. We need to act now, before it's too late. Jules let out a small chuckle, his voice dripping with mock seriousness. Oh, please, if I wanted to take over the galaxy, I'd probably be doing it by now, right? There was a brief pause, and then, as if on cue, the room erupted into laughter. The tension hadn't fully dissipated, but the ice had cracked. Humanity had arrived, and they weren't just impressive, they were impossible to predict. And that was the problem. The silence in the council hall was heavy, thick with lingering uncertainty. Jules Rennes leaned against the railing of the observation deck, arms folded across his chest as he gazed down at the planet below. The Vorsarak had been dealt with, the city now quiet, its streets once again filling with the brave, but confused, survivors. Jules didn't need to see the reports to know that the world was forever changed. But what did that mean for him? For Earth? The weight of the universe was suddenly, deeply aware of his presence. The council had retreated into heated debates, voices rising and falling in waves. One side praised his unorthodox victory, while the other warned that humanity could no longer be considered a mere footnote in the galaxy's book of history. No one had been prepared for the reality of what humans could accomplish. Jules, however, was beyond the spectacle. He just wanted his coffee and to get the hell out of the meeting. That's when the doors to the chamber opened, and the Togreth, the towering, silver-scaled creatures, entered, their heavy footsteps sending ripples through the air. They had been quiet until now, watching and listening, their sharp eyes never leaving Jules. It was clear that whatever conversation had been brewing had led to this moment. A single Togreth, clearly their leader, stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. Human, you have proven your strength, your control over the Vorsarak. But now we must test you further. Your kind may not know it, but we have the right to demand such a test. It is the law of the stars. Jules didn't flinch. His eyes flickered with curiosity. But there was no fear. A test, huh? He raised an eyebrow. What's the catch? The catch, the Togreth said, is that it is not just any test. We must test your ability to outwit and survive. We will put you in a controlled environment, one that will challenge every aspect of your being. He gestured toward the giant, holographic map that illuminated the center of the room. You will face the Amalian trials. The room went still. The Amalian trials were infamous, designed to challenge the very limits of intelligence, strength, and willpower. They were tests not just of physical endurance, but of survival in the most unpredictable, lethal environments known to the galaxy. Jules's lips curled into a smirk. Sounds fun. How bad could it be? The Togreth didn't smile. Bad enough to break even the toughest of beings. If you survive, you will earn the respect of the Galactic Council. If not, you will prove your failure. Jules took a deep breath and pushed himself off the railing. You really think you can break me, huh? The Togreth didn't respond, but the intensity in his gaze was enough. There was no escape from this. There was no talking his way out of it. This was how things worked on this level. They didn't care about Earth's fragile concepts of peace and diplomacy. They wanted a show of strength, of human resilience. Jules glanced back at the holographic map. It depicted a labyrinth of alien landscapes, from boiling deserts to frozen wastelands. He could already feel the sharp edge of the challenge pressing in. Survive, they'd said. But for Jules, survival was never the issue. He knew exactly what they wanted. He just wasn't sure how far they were willing to push before they realized he couldn't be broken. With a nod, he turned to the Togreth. and gave a cocky grin. "All right then. Let's see what you've got." The challenge had been set. Jules Verne was ready to prove something to the galaxy and to himself. Jules Verne's boots hit the rocky ground with a dull thud as the Amalian trials began. The holographic display around him faded into the harsh, tangible reality of an alien world, the landscape stretching out like a twisted nightmare. His eyes narrowed as he took in his surroundings, a barren, desolate stretch of land, dotted with jagged rocks that seemed to pierce the sky like twisted fingers. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur and the sharp bite of cold wind. It felt like being dropped onto a different planet altogether. This was the first trial. A voice crackled over a speaker hidden somewhere in the landscape, smooth but cold. Trial 1. The Furnace Fields. Your objective is simple. Survive the elements and reach the sanctuary. Failure to do so will result in termination. Jules grinned to himself. Simple, huh? He adjusted the collar of his jacket and took a step forward, his pulse steady despite the brutality of his surroundings. The ground beneath him was uneven, unstable, with fissures that threatened to open at any moment. Heat waves rose from cracks in the earth, making the air shimmer, yet the temperature fluctuated wildly, searing one moment and freezing the next. It was as if the planet itself was trying to cook him from the inside out. He wasn't about to let that stop him. Taking a deep breath, Jules steadied himself. The last thing he needed was to rush in blind, so he took stock of his situation. No weapons, no allies, just his wits and the knowledge that the alien council had likely rigged this whole thing to push him to the edge. But Jules had been pushed to the edge before, and he wasn't about to let a little heat or cold take him down. A rumble vibrated through the ground, drawing his attention. With a snap, a massive sandstorm appeared, as if summoned by the planet itself. The winds kicked up, sending a blinding cloud of dust and debris into the air. Jules squinted, shielding his eyes, but his mind clicked into gear. He knew the sandstorm wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was part of the trial, another obstacle in the path to the sanctuary. Really? Jules muttered under his breath, rolling his shoulders and cracking his neck. He could hear the distant sound of creatures growling in the storm. Their presence felt more than seen. This trial was meant to wear him down, to test his patience and survival instincts. But he had faced worse. As the storm raged on, Jules dropped low to the ground, using the jagged rocks for cover. His movements were quick, precise. He didn't need to see everything. He just needed to feel it, understand the rhythm of the trial. His senses were sharp, picking up every subtle shift in the wind and every sound that cut through the chaos of the storm. Suddenly, a shape lunged at him from the swirling dust. Jules didn't hesitate. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the snap of jagged claws that could have easily torn through his flesh. The creature, a grotesque amalgamation of scales and muscle, howled in frustration. It was massive, with 4 powerful limbs and glowing eyes that seemed to burn through the storm. Jules reacted instinctively. He didn't need to fight the creature. He just needed to outsmart it. With a quick flick of his wrist, he grabbed a sharp rock from the ground and hurled it into the storm, the sound of it crashing against the rocks ahead of him, distracting the creature long enough for him to slip past. He didn't slow his pace. The first trial had been a test of endurance. He had passed it, not by brute force, but by reading the situation, by understanding that survival was more about patience than strength. The furnace fields were behind him now, but he knew the trials had only just begun. If this was the beginning, the galaxy's deadliest challenges were just warming up. Jules Verne smiled, his confidence unwavering. He had faced the impossible before, and won. This time would be no different. Jules Verne stood at the entrance to the next trial, his boots crunching softly against the smooth, polished floor beneath him. He narrowed his eyes, scanning the scene before him. The maze of mirrors stretched out in front of him, an endless labyrinth of shimmering walls, each one reflecting his image in ways that made him feel simultaneously small and trapped. The walls were made of some unknown material, translucent and slick, like glass, but they glowed faintly with a strange internal light. His heart beat steadily in his chest. He was no stranger to labyrinths, but this one was different. It wasn't the usual twisting corridors or dead ends. These mirrors didn't just reflect the outside world. They seemed to warp it, bending reality in ways that felt unsettling. A voice echoed around him, smooth and impersonal, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Trial 2. The Maze of Mirrors. Your objective is simple. Find the exit. If you take too long, the maze will take you. Jules grinned, stepping into the maze. His gaze flicked to his reflection in the nearest mirror, a perfect copy of himself, but somehow off. The figure in the reflection seemed to move just a fraction slower than he did. For a brief second, the reflection's eyes widened, an expression of panic flickering across its face. That wasn't normal. None of this was normal. He took a breath, pushing the odd sensation to the back of his mind. The walls of the maze stretched endlessly, the reflections twisting in bizarre patterns. Every time he turned a corner, the mirrored walls seemed to move with him, altering their positions. The maze wasn't just shifting, it was adapting. Jules kept his pace steady, pushing forward. He didn't panic. Panic was a luxury for those who couldn't think their way out of a problem. He reached a junction and paused. In the mirror, he saw himself hesitating for a split second before continuing left. But the reflection, it didn't hesitate. The reflection took a step forward, then turned and faced him with a slow, menacing grin that spread wider with every second. It wasn't him. It wasn't real. Jules clenched his fists, taking a step back. The mirror's reflection mirrored his exact movement, but that grin, it remained. His reflection took a slow, deliberate step forward, the grin stretching unnaturally wide. The face in the glass wasn't his anymore. It was an imposter. His pulse quickened. This was no ordinary trial. This was a battle against himself. Not his body, but his mind. Without warning, the mirror shattered, sending jagged shards of glass flying in all directions. Jules ducked instinctively, but the pieces were already dissolving into thin air, disappearing before they could hit him. The space around him seemed to stretch and contract, shifting between pathways and strange reflections, leaving him with no clear sense of direction. Jules gritted his teeth. There had to be a pattern, a weakness in the system. He just had to find it. In the distance, he heard a faint laugh, a low, mocking sound that came from all around him. His own voice. The reflections were multiplying now, filling the maze with distorted versions of him. Some grinned, others scowled, and a few stood silently, as if waiting. He was surrounded, trapped in a maze of illusions, each one more real than the last. With a deep breath, Jules snapped into focus. This wasn't just a maze of mirrors. This was a maze of his own fears. He closed his eyes, focusing on the stillness of his mind. The trial wasn't about fighting what was in front of him. It was about conquering what was within. He trusted himself, his instincts. The mirrors, the reflections, they were just distractions. His eyes shot open, and he charged forward, his movements quick and precise. He dashed past the mirrors, ignoring the faces that tried to draw his attention. As he sprinted through the maze, the reflections began to blur and distort around him. In the distance, he saw the glow of the exit, just a faint light. He pushed forward, ignoring the false images, the trick of the mirrors. He wasn't running away from his reflection anymore. He was running toward the truth. With one final step, he broke through the last mirror. The light around him intensified as he emerged from the maze, his breath coming heavy but steady. He'd done it. The second trial was over. But as he stood there, catching his breath, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge had only just begun. Jules Rennes stood on the edge of the platform, his boots solid against the cold metal floor. The mammalian trials had been brutal, each test more grueling than the last. But now, standing in the heart of the final challenge, there was a strange sense of calm. The Oblivion Chamber was unlike anything he had faced before, a vast, hollow space with walls that stretched into infinity. The floor was a smooth, glowing surface, pulsing with a soft, rhythmic hum that seemed to seep into his bones. A voice echoed through the chamber, smooth and cold. Trial 3. The final choice. You have made it this far, human. Now choose. Only one path remains. Jules didn't flinch. He had been prepared for this moment ever since he'd stepped into the first trial. The galaxy had thrown everything it could at him, from monsters to mind-bending puzzles. And now it was time for the ultimate test. Choice. The floor beneath him shimmered, and suddenly, two pathways appeared before him. One was bathed in a blinding golden light, the other in shadow, a deep and foreboding darkness that seemed to pull at his very soul. Each path held an aura of power, but only one would lead to true victory. A subtle hum filled the air, vibrating against his skin as the voice spoke again, softer this time. The path of light offers glory, power, recognition, and the respect of the entire galaxy. Choose this, and you will be celebrated forever. Jules stared at the golden path. It was the easy choice, the obvious one. Recognition, power, respect, all the things that any ordinary being would dream of. But something in his gut told him that this was a test of something deeper, something more profound. The golden light was alluring, but it felt shallow. The other path, the one drenched in shadows, called to him in a different way. There was something unsettling about it, but also something raw, something that felt honest. The darkness didn't offer glory. It didn't promise anything but a challenge. It was a risk. But sometimes that was all that mattered. Jules took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had spent his life making decisions like this. He knew there wasn't a clear answer, only the choice that would define him. He turned toward the shadowed path. The moment his foot touched the darkness, the air around him changed. The warmth of the light vanished, replaced by a cool, almost eerie chill. The ground beneath him shifted, and he felt a sudden weight pressing against his chest, a sense that the path would not be easy. But it didn't matter. He wasn't here to take the easy way out. He wasn't here to be celebrated. He was here to survive, to prove something to himself and to everyone who had doubted him. As he moved forward, the shadows seemed to grow, enveloping him in their embrace. The walls of the chamber flickered, distorting into strange shapes that looked almost alive. Strange creatures lurked in the edges of his vision, their eyes glowing faintly as they watched him. But he didn't hesitate. He kept walking, his resolve stronger than ever. Ahead of him, a single light flickered, a beacon. It was the only sign that the trial was nearing its end. Jules pushed on, his movements quick but deliberate. The darkness didn't frighten him. It was just another obstacle, another test. As he reached the light, the chamber around him began to fade, the walls crumbling into nothingness. The trials had come to an end. But what Jules had discovered was more than just survival. It was about understanding himself and realizing that the true victory lay not in the paths others set for him, but in the choices he made along the way. And as the chamber dissolved into the vast emptiness, Jules Rennes smiled, knowing that this challenge, this trial, had been his own to conquer.